All right.
Okay.
All right, Mike, you are
We're
now
good.
the presenter, and I can see your
Excellent.
screen. We are good to go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. I greatly appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. So, as Tim mentioned, Timberscan, or T100 as we refer to it, is a document routing and approval system that was designed specifically for Sage 100 Contractor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just going through a real brief PowerPoint presentation. There aren't very many slides, but once we get through the slides, then basically we'll jump right into the product, and we'll take a kind of a deeper dive into the product and walk through various aspects of T100. So as Tim mentioned, Timberscan was originally designed for Sage 300 CRE, or Timberline. And it was primarily designed as an AP routing and approval system initially. It is now more of a full-fledged document management and routing and approval system for all documents and content. So it doesn't just reside as an AP routing and approval system, but more as a kind of a full document management system for an entire organization. And that's really kind of the design behind Timberscan 100 as well. It's a workflow automation system designed specifically for Sage 100 construction. Some of the highlights of T100: it is a browser-based application, so you'd use a web browser to log in, although you're not going out to what you would refer to as a website per se. You're still, Timberscan 100 is still loaded on your server, but you're using a web browser to actually process and work your way through the various parts of the application. What does it include? It includes an AP routing and approval system with integration to Sage 100, which we'll talk about. I'm going to start there. We're going to walk through the AP routing and approval process first, and then we'll talk about other aspects of the system, i.e. a full document and content management system going beyond AP invoices. So if you wanted to store and manage all of your project management, documents, purchase orders, change orders, RFIs, et cetera, or even if you wanted to go beyond that and store documents such as payroll or human resource documents, you can use the system for that as well. So we will touch on all of that, but we're going to start with AP. And basically, the way that the AP process works is that, and these are the steps that we're going to follow once we go into the system. Everything begins at the point where a document or an invoice is initially created or arrives at your door. So let's talk about AP invoices first. An AP invoice arrives at your door, and what will happen is you'll take that invoice and you will acquire it. So if you're putting it onto a scanning device, or maybe it was something that was emailed, you can take that document and you'll acquire it into the T100 application. Now it becomes a digital image, and all of the processing that takes place after that will happen within T100 and Sage 100. So it gets acquired, and then what happens is the invoice is actually entered in Sage 100. So you're keying in information into Sage 100, and it's being matched against the invoice image that's in T100. Once the invoice is entered, what T100 does is it pulls what we call the metadata. So it's taking all of the basic information that you've keyed in Sage 100 and matches it against that particular document, where it then, if you've set up a routing rule that document or that invoice needs to be routed to an approver, let's say, for example, a project manager, it would then get routed to the project manager, or it could be multiple people. So you can have as many people in an approval process as necessary. Once it goes through the approval process, what's happening on this end is that the approvers they're actually logging into T100, they're looking at their invoices, and they are approving or rejecting those invoices. Depending on what happens at this point, that document could potentially go to one final reviewer, but ultimately, anything that happens, anything that occurs, Sage 100 is updated. So the information is now stored in Sage 100, and your financials have been updated and what have you. And then when you're processing checks, we have the ability to take the checks and attach them to the invoices as well. Now, one other item here, we also attach to the paper clips in Sage 100. So what I mean by that is, once you start processing an invoice and you've saved that invoice, the invoice image data actually gets saved in Sage 100. And then when you attach a check, you could see both the invoice and the check together in Sage 100 in various places using the paperclip. Okay, so with that as kind of an introduction, what I'm going to do is break out of the PowerPoint. We're going to jump into the actual application. We're going to kind of walk through the system from kind of start to finish, especially with AP, and then we'll talk about other documents. So I've already logged into Timberscan 100. Basically, to log in, as you see, I just selected off my web browser. I put in my login, user ID, and password credentials, and it brings me to the master menu. The way the system is designed is you have your various applications along the side panel here. As you select any of these, what it does is it brings up whatever functions are associated with that. So in the data entry queue, for example, you have your acquire function, you have AP invoice processing, and you have data entry for other documents beyond AP invoices. So I'm going to start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. We're going to take that invoice and we're going to bring it into Timberscan. So to do so, what you do is you choose the acquire function. And what will happen is that we're now going to go out and acquire a document. Now, I'm just going to select who it is that's going to be actually processing this document. And I'll say that it's, we'll just say it's going to be an AP invoice. And what I'll do is I'm going to actually take something off of my desktop for right now. So let's go find a Weber's Sheetrock invoice right here. Call it up on the screen. And when it says process image, basically all we're doing at this point is we're taking that document from its initial step of being acquired, and we're then assigning it to someone who's going to be responsible for actually processing that document. So with respect to AP invoices, what we're referring to here is basically we're going to send this to accounts payable. They're going to start keying in invoice information, and they're going to match it against this particular invoice. And I'm going to demonstrate that next. So I'm going to go ahead and process. Now, you see how you do have a number of control buttons here. So if I wanted to, zoom in, zoom out, if I wanted to, draw something on the document, annotations, stamps, those types of things. You've got all of your controls here at the top. But at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and say process the image. It's going to take it out of the acquire queue, and now it moved it to data entry. Because that document was an AP invoice, because that's the way that I selected it, then basically what's going to happen is it's now in the AP invoice queue. So let's go ahead and just call it up. We'll bring up that Weber Sheetrock invoice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the screen a little bit smaller, and alongside this, I'm going to bring up Sage 100. I'm going to go into AP invoices, and I'm going to start processing an invoice. Let's just pull this aside here, and I'll just throw in an invoice number, something like that. And we'll say that it is, I don't have a Weber's, but I have something fairly close. We'll call it Web Interiors. Okay. I'll say that it's for job 215, phase 10, for example, and we'll say it's today's date. If I could plug in the date correctly, we would be okay. That should probably work. Okay. All right. So now what I'll do is I'll start putting in the distribution here. And we'll say that we have quantity of 1. Say the price is $13.77, and we'll charge it to a GL account, and that should be all we need at this point. Okay, so when I go ahead and save this document, telling me that the transaction information isn't correct, but that's okay. I'm going to continue. And what will happen is that at this point now, if you notice over here on the left-hand side, what Timberscan is doing is it's saving the data from Sage 100 and dropping it onto that particular document and processing it. So all in one step, what the system has done is it looked at the invoice information that I keyed in. It took that metadata, it pulled it over here to that particular invoice, saved it, and as that information is being processed, it will then route it off to whomever it needs to go to. So if I had set up a routing rule and said that I wanted to route this off to a project manager, for example, it's going to send that information off. Now, back over here, that document is saved. Now, the status of that document is, actually, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to bring up that particular invoice. Here. So yes. Okay. So we'll go find an invoice somewhere here. Okay, I'm going to get out of here. Okay, let's go back in and we'll plug in an invoice number so we can see what happened. All right. So if I click on the paperclip, all right, there's my invoice. I can now open it up and see that actual image inside Sage 100. So basically in one step, several things happen. I processed an invoice. That invoice image now got attached to the paperclip in Sage 100, and I'm able to call it up, but it also took that data and it processed it inside Timberscan 100. So now that image has now been sent off to various approvers. So let's go back over here and let's go now over to the approval side. So an invoice has been entered. My data entry queue now says I only have 6 documents here because one of the invoices that I had originally, I had 7. I had 5 invoices and 2 other documents, but that invoice is now off to the approver. So I'm going to simulate an approver's role here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up, for example, my workflow execution status. So let's say I'm an approver, I'm a project manager, and I open up and I want to see, for example, what do I have routed to me? So I'll just call up my AP invoices. I'm getting a list here. You know, I can see just some of the basic information. If I want to look at it in more detail, I can actually view the document and call that up if I need to. If not, I can just close this out and kind of work my way back. So I've got kind of a quick view here of various documents and invoices and what have you that have been routed to me. And then, I can see when I actually click on the document, how it kind of brings up a little bit more of the information of how it was coded, what job it's associated with, and those types of things. Now, let's go one step further. Let's actually take the document and let's go to the workflow task queue. And now what I'm going to do is process one of those documents. So I'm going to let's just take this invoice here. And I'm going to say execute. And what it does is it will call up the invoice. Now, in this case, what it has, all of the information that's been coded is sitting here at the bottom of the screen. So everything that was coded on that invoice over in Sage 100 has now been updated here onto the image. And for example, I could reject the invoice at this point. I can approve it. I don't have edit capabilities, but I could potentially edit as well. I could add notes, and I could even attach another supporting document if I needed to. So all of those things are possible. Now, if I just go ahead and approve this invoice, at this point, it's going to take that document or that invoice, and it's going to remove it from my task queue. It's no longer an invoice that I need to approve. Now it's bringing up the next invoice in the queue. And I could go ahead and process that one as well. So it's that simple. The invoice got processed. It gets sent to the approver. The approver calls it up, looks at it, approves, rejects, what have you, edits. And then once they're done, the approval process is done. That invoice is now out of my queue, and it potentially could be sent back to that final reviewer, if you will, who would then take one last look at the invoice. Now, the invoice status, and I may not have called up the right invoice, but typically what happens is the invoice status over in Sage 100, and I forgot to mention this before, typically goes from review, it starts in open. When it's being processed in Timberscan, it changes that status to review automatically. And then once the invoice gets approved and it's gone through its final approval stages, then the status changes back to open over here. Okay, so let's get out of there. Let's go back over here. Let's talk about some of the other things that you can do within the system. So basically what I showed you was how you could go through the process of taking an invoice, acquiring, processing the invoice in Sage 100, matching the metadata automatically, sending it off for review and approval, and then how the document can be approved. Other things that you're able to do. You can also attach checks. So let's say that you processed a batch of checks, you printed them out, and then what you could do is you can acquire those checks the same way that you can acquire AP invoices. Once you do that, you select the attach checks function, and then you can take that batch of checks, starting with, I think I have one here, and bring up the check. I happen to have an invoice, but basically if this were a check, I could just go through and click the attach button, or I can just run this. It's kind of someone had a bit of a sense of humor here. Let's say I had a whole stack of checks sitting here. I click on this Feeling Lucky button. It ripples through that whole batch of checks and attaches each check image to each of the invoice images that you were paying. Okay, so what else? So we've talked about Timberscan 100 from the AP perspective. Other things that you can do. I mentioned how it's a full document management system. So I happen to have in my data entry queue, not just AP invoices. I have other documents as well. So I have this lease agreement, for example. Now, this was acquired the same way that an invoice was. Basically, I scanned the invoice, or in this case, I scanned the lease agreement in, for example, or dragged and dropped it. It's now sitting here. And what I can do is I can go through and I can actually code the document. So I can say what type of document it is. You know, maybe, you know, in this case, it's a change order, and I want to assign it to this particular vendor, and it's for job, you know, 207, and it could be for, you know, change order number 1234, something like that. So basically what you're able to do is you can take and process any document in the system. It doesn't have to just be an AP invoice. Now, how did we get to this point where I was able to take a document and assign it to a document category and document type and actually do the coding? Let me back up and explain how that takes place. What you have in document setup is the ability to create whatever document categories, document types, and available index fields that you want. It's completely user definable. So it's very flexible in the sense that I can go through here and I could say, if I wanted to, you know, in my case, I have two specific categories that I work with, accounts payable and project management. But if I wanted to, you know, add another category, maybe I want to, you know, start working with human resource documents. So my new category is human resources. I can specify who has access to this. I'll say that I'm the person that has access to it. And we'll just go ahead and we'll create that particular category. So now, when I set up my document types, I could set up human resource document types. So I could say, maybe I have, an I-9 form or something like that. So as I go through and I process, I give it a document type name. We'll call it an I-9. This is not necessarily a supporting document, so I'm going to assign it to human resources. And then what I can do is I can start adding index fields. These, again, can be user definable, or I can just select from a library of indexes that already exist in Sage 100. So just for the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to get too specific here, but let's just say that, an I-9 has, we'll just say a cost amount, and, maybe we'll just put a couple of things in here, maybe an employee number, something like that. So basically, I'm just going through, I'm creating a document type and creating the indexes that are associated with this. Where do I want to link that particular document? So again, we talked about the paperclip functionality. These are all of the areas in Sage 100 where I might potentially be able to link that particular document. So maybe I want to link it to the payroll record, for example. So I just go ahead and select that. And now if I were to save an I-9 in T100, just like I was demonstrating where I clicked on the paperclip on the AP invoice, I could go over into payroll and I could click on that I-9 form and it would, or excuse me, on the paperclip, and it would open up an I-9 form if I have one saved in the system. Then I can assign who has access to it. So I'm just going to say that I'm the one that has access. If I had multiple users, I could do that. Then I can set up workflows. So I could say, do I want to just, is there someone that I need to route this document to? There might be a particular workflow or routing rule that I want to assign so that if when an I-9 gets saved, it needs to go to other people for review and approval. So in the same way that you can route an AP invoice for review and approval, you can do the same thing with any other type of document. Once I'm finished, I've saved it, I'm done. It's going to need some other information here. Whoops. Okay, so we'll say that the employee is required. That should give me what I need. And we'll say the payroll record. That should do it. Okay, so I've saved it. So now, if we were to walk through a quick workflow here, I could take a document. I may not necessarily have an I-9, but let's just, we'll pretend. We'll say it's a document. I will pretend that this particular document is an I-9, for example. And we will go to data entry. Pull up our I-9, and here's my index information. I'll say it's associated with Robert Smith, and it's $10 or something like that, and it's for this particular payroll record. Once I save this, if there is a again, if there's a routing associated with it, then it would be routed. If not, I'm just saving it and I'm archiving it so that I could call it up somewhere down the road if I want to see it. So how might I do that? So let's go ahead and save that document. All right, so we're going to back out of here. What I can do is I could go select my search option here. So I click on the search, and now I have the flexibility where I could go in and I could say, let me just find all of my I-9s that have been saved in the system. I'm not going to create any conditions at this point. Just do a search for all of the I-9s. It goes out. It starts to build a list of all the I-9s that I've saved in the system. Now, if I wanted to get more specific, I could say, okay, now find me all the I-9s where the payroll record or the employee number is Robert Smith, for example. So then it just goes out, and when I do the search again, Now it gets more specific. So it starts to skinny down the list. So basically, instead of having to store all of your non-AP documents, still in filing cabinets or, maybe on your Windows file system, you can store all of your documents inside Timberscan 100. And the nice part is these documents can be linked to various criteria in Sage 100. So you're able to see using the paperclip, or by just going out and doing a search, I can go find my documents very quickly and very easily in Timberscan, and then I can just call it up if I need to. I can manipulate it. I can make notes on it. I could, if I needed to, put a stamp on it or any type of annotation, I can do this. Maybe I need to add another page, or maybe I've got another document that I want to add to this. So I can go out and add this particular document. And now I've added that page to the bottom of the document. So there it is. So now I've added this particular receipt that went along with that particular document. So just to kind of give you an idea that it is very flexible in terms of the ability to manage and store all of your documents, and then be able to call them up very quickly and very easily if need be. And when we talk about that search criteria, you can actually save these searches. So instead of me each time I go in, I have to build this query, you can save queries. I don't happen to have any saved, but if I did, I could actually save this one if I wanted to. And then I can just call it up anytime that I want. And it's instead of me building all of the criteria, it's already here in front of me. I just go ahead and click on the Save Search, and it opens up that particular criteria. So it's an AP routing and approval system that has full integration with Sage 100 and matches the invoice information with the data that's keyed into Sage 100. It's also a full document management system beyond AP, allowing you to store, archive, and route any document that you want to be able to save and then call up whenever you need to. And at this point, what I'm going to do is stop and just open up the floor for any questions.